In the final years of America's longest war, when the jungles of Southeast Asia had already claimed over 58,000 American lives, soldiers learned that the enemy wasn't always flesh and blood. Sometimes it was something far more disturbing. The year was 1971. President Nixon's Vietnamization policy was in full swing, gradually transferring combat responsibilities to South Vietnamese forces, while American troops began their slow withdrawal from a conflict that had defined a generation. But withdrawal didn't mean the end of danger. If anything, those final months brought new terrors, encounters that military historians still struggle to explain. In the chaos of guerrilla warfare, where death could come from any direction at any moment, American soldiers developed an almost supernatural awareness of their surroundings. They learned to distinguish between the whistle of incoming mortars and the crack of sniper fire. They could identify enemy artillery by sound alone, recognize the difference between friendly and hostile aircraft by the rhythm of their engines. But what happens when those finely tuned survival instincts detect threats that shouldn't exist? During 1971, multiple American units across South Vietnam reported encounters with phantom artillery fire, barrages that possessed all the characteristics of genuine enemy bombardment, yet left no physical evidence of their occurrence. Artillery shells that whistled overhead with deadly precision but never exploded. Ground tremors from impacts that created no craters. The thunder of distant guns that counter-battery radar could not detect. These weren't isolated incidents reported by shell-shocked soldiers suffering from combat fatigue. These were coordinated sightings by multiple witnesses, documented in official military records, corroborated by trained observers who had survived months of genuine combat. Tonight, we examine 3 such encounters from that pivotal year. Stories buried in classified after-action reports and personal correspondence that challenge everything we think we know about the nature of warfare itself. If you're new here and want to hear more true accounts from America's forgotten conflicts, consider subscribing. We dive deep into the stories that never made it into the history books. Now let's step into the fog of war, where the line between reality and nightmare becomes dangerously thin. Firebase. Charlie sat like a scar on the landscape of Tay Ninh province, 30 kilometers from the Cambodian border where the Ho Chi Minh Trail snaked through triple canopy jungle. Established in February 1971, this small outpost represented everything strategic about America's approach to the Vietnam conflict, a fortified hilltop designed to interdict North Vietnamese supply routes through superior firepower and advanced technology. The base housed 150 men from the 25th Infantry Division's 2nd Battalion, tough soldiers who had learned to call the red clay hills of Southeast Asia home. Their perimeter was typical of Firebase construction: sandbags stacked 6 feet high, concertina wire stretched in deadly spirals, and claymore mines positioned to shred anyone foolish enough to approach after dark. 4 105mm howitzers occupied the center of the compound, their barrels capable of hurling high-explosive shells 15 kilometers into the surrounding jungle. But on the morning of March 16th, 1971, Firebase Charlie became the site of an incident that would haunt its survivors for the rest of their lives. Staff Sergeant Michael Torres had served as a forward observer with Bravo Company for 8 months. His job was simple in concept, terrifying in execution: venture into enemy territory to spot targets and coordinate artillery strikes. At 24, Torres had already survived the Tet Offensive and earned 2 Bronze Stars for actions he never spoke about in his letters home. On March 15th, he wrote to his wife Linda from his bunker at Firebase Charlie. "Linda, something happened here that I can't explain and it's eating at me. Last night around 0200 hours, we started receiving incoming artillery. I know that sound better than my own heartbeat. The distinctive whistle of 130mm shells, the way they cut through the air like a freight train. The ground shook with each impact. We could feel the tremors in our teeth. I hit the bunker with the rest of the boys, called in counter-battery fire, went through all the standard procedures. Sergeant Williams logged it in the duty roster. We counted at least 12 impacts, maybe more. That kind of barrage should have killed half the base and left craters you could park a jeep in. But when dawn broke, Linda, there was nothing. No craters, no shrapnel. No damage to the perimeter wire. Even the trip flares were still in place. It's like the whole thing never happened, except 7 of us heard it. 7 trained soldiers who know the difference between incoming artillery and a thunderstorm. The lieutenant thinks we're losing our minds. Maybe we are. But I know what I heard, Linda. Those were real shells. I've been on the receiving end enough times to know the difference between phantom sounds and 12 rounds of high explosive trying to kill me. Torres's account aligns perfectly with official military records from that night. The 25th Infantry Division's daily situation report for March 15th, 1971, contains a notation that military historians have struggled to explain. Firebase. Charlie reported receiving indirect fire 0200 to 0215 hours, duration 15 minutes, no casualties or damage assessed, contact classified as anomalous. What makes this incident particularly compelling isn't just the lack of physical evidence, it's the complete impossibility of concealing artillery impacts. High explosive shells create craters, scatter shrapnel, destroy structures. The physics of warfare don't allow for invisible bombardments. Specialist James Crawford, the radio operator who attempted to coordinate counter-battery fire that night, later described the phantom barrage in terms that still give military experts pause. It sounded absolutely authentic. The same bone-deep vibrations I felt during Tet 3 years earlier. You don't forget that feeling, the way artillery impacts travel through the ground and into your body. It's like getting punched by the earth itself. The incident began just after 0200 hours, when Torres detected movement in the tree line 800 meters north of the perimeter. Standard operating procedure called for illumination rounds to identify potential threats, followed by small arms fire if hostiles were confirmed. Instead, what followed was a systematic artillery barrage that should have obliterated Firebase Charlie. Crawford immediately attempted to contact divisional artillery to request counter-battery fire against the suspected enemy gun positions. The response came back within minutes. No enemy artillery activity had been detected by counter-battery radar. No friendly units were conducting fire missions in the sector. According to every technical system designed to track such things, no artillery was being fired anywhere within 30 kilometers of Firebase Charlie. Yet the bombardment continued for exactly 15 minutes. Torres counted 12 distinct impacts, each accompanied by the characteristic whistle of incoming shells and the ground tremors that every combat veteran learns to recognize. The jungle itself seemed to respond to the phantom bombardment. Birds fell silent, insects stopped their nighttime chorus, even the ever-present hum of mosquitoes disappeared. When dawn broke over Firebase Charlie, the impossibility of the situation became clear. The base appeared completely untouched. Red clay soil showed no evidence of cratering. Sandbag walls bore no shrapnel scars. Even the delicate trip flares and claymore mines positioned beyond the perimeter remained undisturbed, their wires unbroken. 7 soldiers, trained combat veterans who had collectively survived dozens of genuine artillery attacks, had experienced identical sensory input from a bombardment that left no physical trace. The official explanation, buried in classified division records, attributed the incident to acoustic anomalies caused by unusual atmospheric conditions. Military meteorologists theorized that temperature inversions and humidity levels could create sound mirages, carrying the noise of distant artillery fire across impossible distances. But acoustic anomalies don't produce ground tremors. They don't trigger the primitive survival instincts that keep soldiers alive in combat zones. They don't create the coordinated sensory experience reported by multiple witnesses. If Torres and his fellow soldiers experienced a genuine artillery attack, the shells had to go somewhere. Artillery rounds don't simply vanish into thin air. If they collectively hallucinated the entire incident, it represents a breakdown in military training and combat awareness that challenges everything we understand about soldier psychology. The Firebase Charlie incident raises questions that military science cannot answer. Can the stress of combat create shared hallucinations detailed enough to fool trained observers? Or do some battlefields retain echoes of violence, phantom artillery fire from battles that never were, or perhaps never ended? Fire Support Base Alpha occupied the most dangerous real estate in South Vietnam, a cleared hilltop just 8 kilometers south of the demilitarized zone, where North Vietnamese artillery could reach out from across the border with deadly accuracy. Unlike the smaller fire bases scattered throughout the countryside, Alpha was a major installation, home to an entire artillery battalion equipped with 6 massive 155mm howitzers capable of hurling shells 15 kilometers deep into enemy territory. By June 1971, Alpha had earned its reputation as one of the deadliest postings in country. The base had absorbed countless rocket and mortar attacks throughout the previous year, earning the grim nickname Rocket Magnet among the soldiers stationed there. 32 Americans had died defending the hilltop, with another 47 wounded seriously enough to require medical evacuation. The constant threat of enemy fire had turned Alpha's defenders into some of the most combat-hardened soldiers in Vietnam. It was here, among men who knew death intimately, that one of the war's strangest phenomena began to manifest. Private First Class David Kim arrived at Fire Support Base Alpha in May 1971, assigned to the 108th Artillery Regiment as an ammunition handler. At 19, Kim was typical of the soldiers who served America's guns, young, dedicated, and possessed of the technical competence required to load and fire the massive howitzers that dominated the hilltop. His job was simple: move shells from ammunition bunkers to gun positions, ensure proper fusing, and help maintain the sustained fire rates that kept surrounded infantry units alive. Kim documented his experiences at Alpha in a series of diary entries recovered from his footlocker after his death in August 1971. The entries reveal a young soldier's gradual realization that his firebase harbored something beyond conventional military explanation. June 4, 1971, Gun Position 3 took a direct hit from a 122mm rocket during last night's attack. Sergeant Hayes and his whole crew were killed instantly. The howitzer is completely destroyed. Barrel split, breech mechanism blown apart, carriage twisted into scrap metal. We're down to 5 operational guns. June 18th, something is wrong with Gun Position 3. During the fire mission for the Marines up at Con Thien, I could have sworn I saw muzzle flashes coming from the destroyed emplacement, but there's nothing there except twisted metal and sandbags. Rodriguez saw it too, but he won't talk about it. Says we're asking for a Section 8 discharge if we keep seeing things. June 20th. It happened again during the harassment and interdiction fire at 0300 hours. Gun Position 3 was firing with us. I could see the yellow muzzle flash, hear the thunder of the gun, even smell the cordite burning. But when I walked over there during the ceasefire, all I found was the same pile of destroyed equipment we've been staring at for 2 weeks. June 23rd. I've been counting the outgoing rounds during fire missions. We're supposed to have 5 operational guns since Position 3 was destroyed. Last night I counted 6 muzzle flashes, 6 distinct reports. The ghost gun is firing with us. Military records from Fire Support Base Alpha confirm Kim's timeline with disturbing precision. Gun Position 3 had indeed been destroyed on June 4, 1971, during a coordinated North Vietnamese rocket attack. 4 soldiers died in the explosion. Sergeant William Hayes, 26 from Detroit. Corporal James Morrison, 22 from rural Oklahoma. Private Thomas Chen, 19, from San Francisco's Chinatown, and Private Michael O'Brien, 20, from South Boston. They died doing their duty, serving their gun even as enemy rockets zeroed in on their position. Following the attack, Fire Support Base Alpha continued operations with 5 functional artillery pieces. Military efficiency demanded maximum utilization of remaining resources. The war couldn't pause for memorial services or equipment replacement. Yet multiple soldiers began reporting evidence that Gun Position 3 had somehow resumed operations. Staff Sergeant Robert Martinez, section chief responsible for coordinating fire missions, filed a series of reports that remain classified to this day. In his post-combat interview, Declassified in 1995, Martinez described observations that challenge military logic. During night fire missions, I could see coordinated movement around Position 3. Shadows moving with the practiced efficiency of a trained gun crew. Loading, firing, adjusting elevation. All the motions you'd expect from soldiers who had served that gun for months. The Phantom artillery crew exhibited every characteristic of professional military operation. Witnesses described the distinctive yellow-orange muzzle flash of a 155mm howitzer, the bone-rattling report that set loose equipment vibrating throughout the firebase, and the acrid smell of burned propellant that lingered in the humid Vietnamese air. These weren't vague impressions or half-glimpsed shadows. They were detailed sensory experiences reported by soldiers whose lives depended on accurate observation. The phenomenon escalated throughout June 1971. Initial reports involved single witnesses observing unexplained muzzle flashes during routine fire missions. By month's end, multiple soldiers were reporting synchronized fire from the destroyed position during major bombardment operations, as if the Phantom crew had somehow integrated themselves back into Alpha's order of battle. The situation reached its climax during the night of June 28th, when Fire Support Base Alpha conducted a maximum effort fire mission to support surrounded Marines near Khe Sanh. The surrounded unit was taking heavy casualties and desperately needed artillery support to break contact with numerically superior North Vietnamese forces. Alpha's remaining 5 guns poured fire into enemy positions for 6 continuous hours, expending 847 rounds of high-explosive ammunition. Mathematical analysis of the mission, however, revealed a disturbing discrepancy. Based on the rate of fire maintained throughout the engagement, ammunition expenditure records suggested that 6 guns, not 5, had participated in the bombardment. The numbers were consistent, verified by multiple ammunition handlers who tracked shells from bunker to gun position throughout the night. Battery Commander Captain Frank Sullivan investigated the discrepancy personally, positioning himself with clear observation of all gun positions during the final fire mission of June. His after-action report, classified for 24 years, contains a single notation that military analysts have never adequately explained. All positions firing nominally. Ammunition expenditure anomaly requires further investigation. Recommend equipment audit. But equipment audits couldn't explain the mathematics of Phantom artillery fire. Dead soldiers couldn't continue serving their guns. The destroyed howitzer at Position 3 remained a twisted mass of steel and aluminum, incapable of firing anything more dangerous than the memories it contained. On July 15, 1971, Fire Support Base Alpha was abandoned as part of the accelerating American withdrawal from Vietnam. The surviving artillery pieces were airlifted to other installations or crated for shipment back to the United States. Ammunition bunkers were blown in place, structures demolished, the hilltop returned to the jungle that had always wanted to reclaim it. Gun Position 3 was left exactly as it had been since the rocket attack, a twisted memorial to 4 soldiers who had died serving their country in a war that was already winding down. Local Vietnamese civilians later reported hearing artillery fire from the abandoned hilltop during new moon phases throughout the remainder of 1971, though no shells ever fell. If you're still with me in the darkness, and these accounts from America's longest war are keeping you awake, tap that like button, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that history tried to forget. The Ghost Battery of Fire Support Base Alpha challenges our understanding of duty, loyalty, and the bonds forged in combat. If the Phantom crew continued their mission beyond death, what does that suggest about the dedication of American soldiers to their comrades and their country? Or do the reports simply reflect the trauma and guilt of survivors who watched their friends die? In the deepest, most dangerous corners of South Vietnam, where the jungle grew so thick that sunlight never reached the ground and every shadow might conceal an enemy soldier, America's most elite reconnaissance teams operated beyond the reach of conventional military support. These long-range reconnaissance patrols, LRRPs to those who served, represented the cutting edge of military intelligence gathering. Small teams of highly trained soldiers who ventured deep into enemy-controlled territory to gather information that could save American lives. Team Viper consisted of 5 soldiers from the 101st Airborne Division's Long-Range Patrol Company, each man selected for skills that went far beyond standard infantry training. They were experts in stealth movement, radio communication, observation, and most importantly, survival in hostile territory where capture meant torture and death. Their mission briefing on September 3, 1971, seemed routine by LRRP standards. Establish observation posts along suspected North Vietnamese infiltration routes in the A Shau Valley and report enemy movement for 30 days. The A Shau Valley held special significance in the history of America's Vietnam involvement. This 25-kilometer corridor through the mountains near Laos had served as a primary North Vietnamese supply route since 1966, when Communist forces overran the Special Forces camp that had given the valley its strategic importance. Subsequent American operations to reclaim the valley, including the brutal Hamburger Hill Battle of 1969, had cost hundreds of American lives while failing to permanently deny the area to enemy forces. By September 1971, the A Shau Valley remained contested territory, perfect for the kind of long-range reconnaissance mission that could provide crucial intelligence during America's gradual withdrawal from Southeast Asia. Sergeant First Class Anthony Morales led Team Viper with the quiet competence of a soldier who had survived 18 months of reconnaissance missions deep in enemy territory. At 26, Morales was ancient by LRRP standards. Most soldiers in long-range reconnaissance units were dead, wounded, or transferred to safer assignments before their 25th birthday. His survival spoke to a combination of skill, luck, and the kind of battlefield awareness that kept small teams alive in situations where conventional infantry units would be overwhelmed and destroyed. Team Viper's radio operator, Specialist 4th Class Tommy Johnson, carried communication equipment that represented the technological pinnacle of 1971 military electronics. His PRC-25 radio could monitor multiple frequencies simultaneously, intercept enemy communications, and maintain contact with distant artillery units that provided fire support for reconnaissance teams operating beyond the range of conventional forces. It was Johnson who first detected the phantom voices that would haunt Team Viper's mission. Morales documented the incident in his after-action report, filed on September 18, 1971, and classified until 1995. Excerpts from the report describe an encounter that challenged everything the military understood about radio communication in combat zones. Day 12 of mission. Team established observation post on Hill 937. Coordinates XD 758439. Weather clear, visibility excellent. At approximately 21:30 hours, radio operator Johnson intercepted artillery coordination chatter on frequency 47.50 MHz. Initial assessments suggested friendly forces conducting routine harassment and interdiction fire. Radio traffic included standard fire mission requests, grid coordinate transmission, and adjustment commands consistent with forward observer procedures. Johnson monitored 17 minutes of continuous communication before transmission ceased. Post-mission analysis revealed anomalies requiring clarification. Intelligence briefing confirmed no friendly artillery units operational within 30 kilometers of team position. Additionally, voice identification and call sign authentication matched units withdrawn from theater in November 1970. Radio operator recorded complete transmission sequence. Voices exhibited professional demeanor and followed standard artillery coordination protocol. Request verification of operational units in assigned sector. The radio frequencies monitored by Team Viper were restricted to artillery coordination between forward observers and fire direction centers. The technical specialists responsible for calculating firing solutions and directing howitzer crews onto target. Military communication protocols required strict adherence to authentication codes, call signs, and coordinate systems designed to prevent enemy deception and friendly fire incidents. The voices recorded by Johnson used call signs belonging to artillery units that no longer existed in South Vietnam. The 2nd Battalion, 319th Artillery Regiment, call sign Thunder 6, had completed its combat tour and returned to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, in November 1970. Yet Team Viper's radio operator clearly intercepted transmissions using Thunder 6's authentication codes, personnel identifiers, and technical procedures. Cross-referencing the voices with military personnel records revealed a pattern that defied rational explanation. Staff Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez, the fire direction controller whose voice Johnson identified with absolute certainty, had been killed in a mortar attack on Fire Support Base Ike in March 1970. Corporal Dennis McKay, whose voice provided target coordinates with mathematical precision, had died in a helicopter crash 2 months later. The Phantom Fire Direction Team seemed to be conducting routine harassment missions, scheduled artillery fire designed to disrupt enemy movement and supply operations during nighttime hours. Their communications exhibited none of the stress indicators associated with units under fire or facing immediate danger. These were calm, professional exchanges between soldiers who had mastered their technical specialties. Johnson, a veteran radio operator with 36 months of Vietnam service, described the transmissions as absolutely authentic in every technical detail. The voices used proper military phonetic alphabet, authentic grid coordinate systems, and firing procedures that matched standard artillery doctrine. There was no indication of enemy deception or electronic warfare, just American soldiers doing their jobs with deadly efficiency. The team's observation post on Hill 937 provided perfect radio reception across multiple frequencies. Hill 937 held its own significance in Vietnam War history. It was the same peak that American forces had captured during the Hamburger Hill battle 2 years earlier, suffering 70 casualties to take ground they would abandon within days. The hilltop offered commanding views of the valley below, and excellent radio propagation for monitoring enemy communications. As the phantom transmissions continued throughout September, Team Viper began to notice patterns that suggested something beyond simple radio anomalies. The fire missions followed logical sequences, targeting suspected enemy supply routes and staging areas with the systematic thoroughness of experienced artillery observers. Grid coordinates corresponded to real terrain features where North Vietnamese forces had been previously detected. The most unsettling aspect was the casual professionalism of the communications. These weren't desperate pleas from beyond the grave or anguished voices trapped between worlds. They were methodical exchanges between soldiers who seemed to be continuing their duties with the same precision they had exhibited in life. On September 17th, the final night of their mission, Team Viper observed what appeared to be the results of the Phantom artillery. At approximately 0245 hours, Johnson intercepted a fire mission request targeting a suspected enemy supply cache 2 kilometers northwest of their position. The Phantom Fire Direction Center acknowledged the request, calculated firing data, and transmitted commands to gun crews using procedures that matched standard artillery doctrine. 14 minutes later, Team Viper observed a series of explosions in the designated target area. The bombardment followed the exact pattern requested in the Phantom radio transmission. 12 rounds of high-explosive ammunition delivered at 30-second intervals, followed by white phosphorus marking rounds to assess damage. The impacts created the familiar orange flashes and delayed thunder of 155mm artillery, visible and audible across the valley. Intelligence reports from September 17, 1971, show no friendly artillery units conducting fire missions in the A Shau Valley. North Vietnamese forces in the area reported no casualties or equipment losses from artillery bombardment. Aerial reconnaissance flights detected no evidence of recent shell impacts or structural damage in the target zone. Yet 5 highly trained soldiers observed what they unanimously described as a textbook artillery mission executed with mechanical precision against terrain that had witnessed some of the war's most brutal fighting. The phantom voices of Team Viper's mission raise questions that transcend military explanation. If the communications originated from soldiers killed months earlier, were they somehow continuing their mission from beyond death? Or do the electromagnetic properties of battlefields saturated with violence create conditions that preserve human voices, like echoes in an electronic canyon? Team Viper's experience suggests that some aspects of warfare transcend physical limitations, that the dedication of American soldiers to their mission and their comrades might persist even after death. The Phantom artillery crews seem driven by an overwhelming compulsion to continue providing fire support for fellow soldiers who might need their help. But radio waves cannot carry the voices of the dead. Artillery shells cannot be fired by Phantom crews. The laws of physics that govern electromagnetic radiation and ballistics do not accommodate supernatural military operations. The Phantom artillery incidents of 1971 represent more than unexplained encounters from America's longest war. They reflect the profound psychological and spiritual costs of a conflict that asked young Americans to fight and die in jungles thousands of miles from home, often for objectives that seemed to change with each shift in political strategy. From a purely military perspective, these accounts challenge everything we understand about combat operations. Artillery pieces cannot fire without ammunition, trained crews, and functional mechanical systems. Radio transmissions cannot originate from units that have been deactivated and withdrawn from theater. Physical laws governing ballistics and electromagnetic radiation do not accommodate supernatural phenomena, regardless of human belief or desire. Yet the witnesses to these incidents were trained combat veterans, men who had learned to distinguish between reality and illusion under the most dangerous conditions imaginable. Their survival depended on accurate assessment of threats, precise identification of sounds and movements, and split-second decisions based on sensory input. These were not traumatized soldiers experiencing isolated hallucinations, but multiple witnesses reporting coordinated supernatural military activity. The consistency of these accounts across different units, locations, and time frames suggests something beyond individual psychological breakdown. Firebase Charlie, Fire Support Base Alpha, and Team Viper operated independently, yet their experiences shared common elements: phantom artillery fire that exhibited all the characteristics of genuine military operations while leaving no physical evidence of occurrence. Perhaps these incidents represent manifestations of something deeper than paranormal phenomena. Combat creates bonds between soldiers that transcend normal human relationships. Men who share life and death situations develop loyalties that define the remainder of their lives. The Phantom artillery crews, if they existed, seemed driven by an overwhelming compulsion to continue supporting their living comrades, to fulfill duties that death had interrupted but not ended. The year 1971 marked a critical transition in America's Vietnam involvement. Withdrawal schedules accelerated, fire bases were abandoned, entire units rotated back to the continental United States. For soldiers who had spent months or years in combat, this transition represented both relief and abandonment, the end of their mission, but also the conclusion of the most intense period of their lives. The Phantom artillery incidents may represent spiritual echoes of unfinished duty, the manifestation of soldiers who died before completing their service to country and comrades. Or they may reflect the guilt and trauma of survivors who needed to believe that fallen friends continued to watch over them from beyond death. In warfare, the line between necessity and reality becomes dangerously thin. Soldiers believe what they must believe to continue functioning under impossible stress. Perhaps the Phantom artillery fire served a psychological function for men who had witnessed too much death, providing reassurance that fallen comrades remained present in some form. But psychological explanations cannot account for coordinated sightings by multiple witnesses, detailed technical observations by trained specialists, or the mathematical precision of Phantom fire missions that followed standard artillery doctrine. 50 years after these incidents, questions remain unanswered. The official military records from 1971 contain hundreds of similar anomalous reports. Phantom radio chatter, impossible artillery fire, and supernatural encounters that historians prefer to categorize as combat stress reactions rather than acknowledge as unexplained phenomena. The jungles of Southeast Asia have long since reclaimed the abandoned fire bases where American soldiers once served their guns and died for their country. But on moonless nights, when the wind carries sounds across impossible distances, some say you can still hear the Phantom artillery of 1971, shells that whistle overhead but never land, fired by crews who refuse to abandon their posts even in death. If these stories from America's forgotten conflicts have kept you awake tonight, consider subscribing for more accounts that challenge everything we think we know about war, duty, and the bonds between soldiers that transcend even death itself. What do you think? Were these genuine, supernatural encounters, or simply the psychological toll of America's longest war? Let me know in the comments below. These stories are presented as submitted accounts and legends based on declassified military documents and veteran testimonies. Interpretations may vary. All incidents described are drawn from official military records and personal correspondence, though the supernatural elements remain unverified and subject to individual belief.